So, back in the midst of time, or 2017 as it's also known, a few thousand retro computing enthusiasts backed a new Kickstarter, which was to design, develop, and build a new version of the famous British microcomputer, the ZX Spectrum, which, as most of you listening to this will no doubt be aware, was a major success and staple piece of kit in many teenagers' homes back in the early 1980s and even into the early 1990s, despite the 16-bit revolution having begun long before. The plan was a very ambitious one, and thousands of enthusiasts pledged to receive one of these new computers. I was one of those who pledged to receive two models. There was a bare bones model, which I believe, upon recollection, was £99 for the board only, which gave you access to a bare board, and that duly arrived within a matter of months, probably about 8 or 9 months, if I recall correctly, from the point of the Kickstarter taking place, which was April, May 2017, and sort of just after Christmas, I think it was after, it might have been just before, but anyway, around Christmas 2017, those of us who had pledged for a bare boards version of the Next, as it was called, or going to be called, received those. And we were expecting, within a matter of months, to receive the fully fledged product, encased in all its plastic glory, with a brand new keyboard. Now, unfortunately, as is often the case with Kickstarters, and despite the best intentions of everybody involved, these projects tend to experience delays, and that was certainly the case here. Indeed, it was delayed so much that I've only received my ZX Spectrum Next, which is an accelerated version, as I shall explain later, in March 2020. That wasn't the first run. The first run of Nexts were delivered in January, I believe, of the fully encased versions. They were the pretty basic versions. The accelerated versions come with Raspberry Pi, other bits and bobs to make it a bit more of a complete package. There was also options to have an engraved version. You could have your name or any sentence you like, really, engraved on the case itself. And so the team didn't really have the capacity, the storage space to produce and deliver the entire Kickstarter at once, and so they were sent out in tranches, which was a little bit of an issue because some of the early receivers had decided to pass on their Nexts, and that meant occasionally one or two would turn up on eBay for sale, which caused a few ripples or a few waves amongst some of us. But it hasn't been a huge delay. We're talking a matter of weeks, so it's not a big problem. I guess it has to be expected given the storage available. So the final models are going out now. They are the accelerated models. They have been going out to backers since mid-March, and many of those are now being received. There have been a few issues with the deliveries. Some of the boxes have been damaged in transit, which is to be expected, I guess, really, given the manner in which some of these parcels are handled by the delivery agents from time to time. There have been a few issues, a few broken Nexts with keys missing or boxes slightly damaged. But on the whole, it's been a successful project. And given the situation regarding other Kickstarter projects involving the ZX Spectrum that shall remain nameless, but have caused huge problems amongst the retro gaming community in recent months and years, it can only be considered to be a complete success. So what is the Spectrum Next exactly? Well, it's a machine that firstly is capable of playing the vast majority of original Spectrum titles that were developed back in the day, back in the 80s and 90s. It comes with 1 meg of memory, which is obviously hugely enhanced on the original 48K or even 128K that the later models came with. Even though we are emulating an 8-bit machine here, the quality of the new software is very much 16-bit in appearance. I think it's fair to say, if you're looking at some of the newer titles like Pogie, for example, or the Oliver Twins' new Dizzy title, it very much gives an impression of a 16-bit title as opposed to, the kind of Spectrum or Commodore 64 title that you will be accustomed to for 8-bit computers. There is a Wi-Fi module available also for those who wish to go online and perhaps download software or utilise their new Nexts in some other as yet undetermined fashion, although I'm sure much development will take place over the coming months and years. And interestingly, you can run the Next in the standard ZX Spectrum 3.5 MHz mode and also in 2 turbo modes. one twice the speed of the original Spectrum, and one 4 times the speed of the original Spectrum. Now, you may be wondering what the purpose of that is. And, for example, there were some titles that you may or may not recall. And I'm thinking of things like Driller and some of the Freescape titles from back in the day that ran like a snail, quite frankly. But it will be very interesting to see how they operate under the new turbo modes, which could actually make them basically playable, because let's be honest, 1 or 2 of them looked great, but there wasn't really much of a game there. So it'll be interesting to test 1 or 2 of those, and I'll be doing that later on in the video. Before we go on to the unboxing, I have to mention Rick Dickinson, who was the designer of the Next, or the designer of the case, at least. And Rick, who was also the lead developer behind the ZX81 and the Spectrum back in the day, sadly passed away last year, and unfortunately never got to see his project realised or delivered, which is a dreadful shame. But of course, without Rick's determination and fantastic work, none of us would be able to enjoy these Next today. So he will be sadly missed by everyone in the retro community. And it's nice that in the manual for the Next, the first page you see contains a dedication to Rick. So the credit for this project, a lot of that goes to Rick, who obviously played a major role in developing and designing the chassis for this new computer, which itself was designed by a very small team who have worked earnestly and with great determination to see this project delivered. People like Henrique, Jim Bagley, Victor, and it has been a really interesting project to follow during its development. There have been a fair few ups and downs along the way, as you would expect with this kind of project. We're not talking about a hugely resourced manufacturer. This is a few guys who got together, had a dream one day, and wanted to deliver a project to the retro gaming community. And so with that introduction out of the way, let's move on to unboxing the Next itself. So without further ado, let's have a look inside and see what we've got. Taking the lid off, I'm just going to pop that to one side. Actually, I'm going to give that to my erstwhile assistant to my left, young Harry. Just pop that on the floor for me, please, buddy. Here we are. This is the Spectrum Next. As you can see, it seems to be in one piece, which is obviously good. Some people have unfortunately reported or posted videos of receiving theirs with missing keys or missing manuals or other things, which was a bit of an issue in the first run, and I should stress not a result of the manufacturers doing it. It was really down to the delivery agents, where I guess they weren't treated particularly well in delivery. So one of the things I believe that the guys have done, the team behind the Next, is to add these inserts just to try and keep the computer in place and to stop it moving backwards and forwards. So we can remove these straight away. They seem to have done their job, which is excellent. Now, there is one minor issue that we've got, and it is a very minor thing, I think, really, in terms of the overall package. I don't know if you can see here. We can see it a little bit better when I remove the computer, but there's a small tear in the corner of the inlay, the box here, in which the Next sits. Again, that's been quite a common issue with a lot of these, and something that the team behind the Next have vowed to address when they do their next run, which I believe is imminent once they've got all these out the door, which is something they're very close to achieving right now. So here we go. This is an accelerated version of the Next, which is why we've had to wait a little bit longer than some others to receive ours. The accelerated version includes the Raspberry Pi, which gives us other options, many of which are yet to be explored, but it gives us that potential for expansion in the future, which is something that I'm sure a lot of the more technical guys out there are going to be keen to deliver or work on. So let's have a little look at the computer. First of all, we've got our box here, which includes our power supply and various attachments. Not much to see here, really. They're the attachments, which I'll just pop to my right hand side, and we've got the power supply, which is a generic power supply. As you can see, not a lot to look at there. That's simply just to do the job. And once again, I'll give those to my assistant, to my left this time. and he can take care of those. So let's have a look at the Next itself. It's just taking it out of the box. As you can see, it's stuck in fairly well, and you can probably just see now where that tear is in the corner. This is a very common issue that I've seen in lots of the packages that have been delivered. We're better off than some though, because others have had both sides torn and manuals missing, for example. So I'm particularly pleased with the condition in which this one has arrived. Let's just take a quick look at what we've got here. So this is the Sinclair ZX Spectrum Next, the accelerated version, as designed by Henrik and his team, including Jim Bagley and Victor, who have worked incredibly hard to get this out the door, and it really is a feat. And in some way, it's a bit like going back to the early 80s, that kind of cottage industry feel to the whole thing, which I think is why it's appealed to everyone in a way. It is a little bit like Sir Clive, sitting there in Cambridge designing a new computer, and Chris and the other guys at Acorn challenging them. So let's have a quick look around. So as you can see, we've got the keyboard, got a nice click on the keys. It's no Spectrum 48 rubber key job, that's for sure. Sort of aesthetically, I guess it looks quite similar to the Spectrum Plus, which was the successor to the basic 48K model. But it's a much better keyboard. I mean, you could happily type. You could actually sit there, I think, with a copy of your computer from yesteryear and quite happily type in a listing without sort of experiencing some kind of mental breakdown as a result of having to go back and delete every third or fourth character because you've inadvertently pressed the wrong key. So happy with that. That's good. That's really nice. The overall build quality is exceptional. It's quite heavy. It's a heavy unit. Feels like a proper old school home computer, and I guess that is what the team were aiming for. So from that perspective, it's been an unqualified success so far. We haven't turned it on yet, of course, but that's where we are. So just having a little look round start with the front. On the front, as you can see, we've got two joystick inputs, 1 and 2. Your standard old 9-pin inputs there. I'm just taking a little look at the front, and there's no scratch marks at all by the looks of it, which is good because that's something some other people have reported in the shiny areas here. On the left-hand side, we've got the ubiquitous reset button and a couple of extra buttons and the SD card input, which is where obviously all our educational software is stored, and 1 or 2 games perhaps. Flipping round to the back, this is where everything happens. And should just stress there's nothing on the right-hand side apart from these 4 plastic pieces to brighten up the case a little bit, make it a little more aesthetically pleasing. On the back, we've got, this is where everything happens. We've got the 9-volt input for power. We've got a keyboard and mouse PS2 connection on the right-hand side if you want to use an external keyboard. So that's another good, a really good point, a really good design choice. You're not limited to this specific keyboard if you've perhaps got fatter fingers than I have. So that's good. So you can again, you can use a mouse. VGA RGB port for monitors. We've also got HDMI for newer monitors. I guess that's again a personal choice which you prefer. If you want to go for the old school style of resolution, you might opt for that and perhaps use the HDMI for it's going to be a much crisper, clearer picture, whichever one you use, let's be honest, so it doesn't really matter. The old standard classic ear mic sockets for recording tapes or loading games from tape, which is another fantastic addition to the set of options available with this. The new Next is that you can take those old audio tapes, if you've got any, from back in the day, and you can load those. You can still get the old experience while you'd want to when you've got an SD card and all your games on there. I'm not sure, but you might wish to just go for that little bit of throwback experience, perhaps that little bit of nostalgia that ensures you have to sit there for 5 minutes waiting for a game to load rather than 5-10 seconds. But anyway, each to their own as it is. So there we go. That is the Spectrum Next. Now, just to give you some comparison of size, I mean, my hands are fairly usual, regular size hands. So that should give you some kind of idea of where we are. But I'm going to ask Harry now to just pass me an original ZX Spectrum 48K. Well, I say original. The internal Spectrum is the original. As you will plainly see, the external case is not original. This is from my friend Georgie in China, who manufactures and delivers these Repro cases, which are absolutely fantastic. If you ever get the opportunity to get one, I would advise you to do so. They come in all kinds of colours and they look absolutely stunning and do the job perfectly. But as you can see, I'm not going to actually put it on top, but that gives you some idea of the, the comparison of size. The depth is very similar. The Spectrum Next is probably about, a little less than a third of the size, or a little more, should I say, than a third wider than our original 48K model here. So, yeah, pleased with that. It looks absolutely fantastic. Just one more thing to look at before we go into the testing section of this video is the manual, which is something that everybody has been really looking forward to. I don't have one of the original manuals to hand. I shall perhaps get one out of the loft later on just to show you a comparison, but it's a very similar size. Now, I know the guys behind this have spent an absolutely extraordinary amount of time preparing this manual to ensure that it's completely comprehensive and tells you everything you need to know to use the Spectrum from scratch. If, like me, you're a very, very lapsed programmer and perhaps haven't done a lot of programming, basic or machine code for the last, gosh, where are we now? 35 years, I guess. 30 years in some cases, perhaps, if you're a little bit younger than I am. And this will bring back some memories of those days. And it really is. And I should stress that I'm not coming into this blind. I've looked through the PDF version of this manual, and it is completely comprehensive. As I say, it's superbly done. Absolute credit to the team behind this. It's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal job, and I really look forward to getting my teeth into this, perhaps with my son, and going through and writing a few basic programs. Probably a little more extensive than the sort of thing that we used to write on the TV screens at Dixon's and WH Smith's and Keddy's back in the day, which frequently got us into trouble. But anyway, the less said about that, the better. So that is the complete package. We have the manual. We have the very nice box, actually. In fact, I'll tell you what I haven't done yet is I haven't shown you the back of the box, just to show you what's on the reverse side. Very nicely done, actually. As you can see, it is very old school in the way it's been prepared. Bit of bump about what it does, what it is. Your hardware specs, which we all like to see. And then, of course, some examples of the games you can play on the new Next. And these are all new titles, as I understand it. Well, actually, no, that's not completely true. Lords of Midnight certainly isn't a new title. Dreamworld Pogie is a game that's been developed for the new system. Dungeonet, I mean, you can see these aren't original Spectrum titles by the colour palette employed. Wonderful Dizzy, which the twins are preparing, as I understand. Must confess, I was never a huge fan of the Dizzy games, but again, each to their own, and this is another title that we're looking forward to getting to play. Lords of Midnight, of course, is an old classic. Again, not something I was particularly into at the time, but I know a lot of people have been looking forward to playing this, and a lot of people have been firing this up as their first game. Perhaps it's on the SD card, I don't know, I haven't had a look yet. But yeah, I mean, it really is a solid package. You know, it's the kind of thing, if you walked into WH Smith's, and I'm fairly certain that the days of them stocking home computers are long gone now, but it's the sort of package that, you know, if you walked into the shops and on the shelf, you'd be impressed. It's very professional, considering this has been done by a very small team, a handful of guys. It really is a really fantastic achievement, and they've done a really good job to produce this. Anyway, that is the Spectrum Next, the package. That's what we've got out of the box, and as I say, I'm very pleased that ours has arrived in almost 100% perfect condition. Certainly not going to cry about the small tear on the insert. So there we go. So now we've got to go and see whether it works or not. So I shall see you on the other side, and we're going to do some testing just to see how it plays out. And so there it is. That just about concludes our review of the Spectrum Next. And if you have a Next of your own, I hope you're having plenty of fun with it. If not, and you're hoping to get one soon, keep an eye out for the next Kickstarter, which I understand is due to open imminently. Thank you for watching this presentation, and hopefully we'll see you again very soon.